guys, so today we got a question about private lessons versus group classes. Comes from Marc, and he asks it in kind of an interesting way. He says, Chewy, you only get to choose one. You don't get to choose both. Which one would you rather do? Would you rather have private lessons plus an occasional open mat, or would you rather do group classes only? Which one would you choose? And Marc, thanks for the question. And it's an interesting one. So I'll get into my ideas on private lessons and which one I would choose. So check it out. When I first started doing jiu-jitsu, the idea of private lessons was kind of a novel thing to me. It was new. I'm sure people did them in wrestling, but the team that I had in wrestling, we were all poor, so private lessons weren't really a thing. I see people doing them now, but back then I wasn't exposed to them in wrestling. And so when I got into jiu-jitsu, this idea of like, I'm going to pay you for a private lesson was kind of new to me. Now, it seemed like an interesting thing, seemed like it would be really helpful to you, but at the time I also couldn't afford them, because around the time in my first year of jiu-jitsu especially, I was always broke because I was paying for my gym membership and my friend's membership. Now, I did it happily because it was a great exchange, because he had a car and I didn't. So I paid for his gym membership, and in turn, he would drive us to the gym. Anybody that maybe is in that situation, if you're a teenager, just maybe some ideas for you. But I would pay for our memberships and we would go train together. And so I didn't have the money to then pay for another private lesson on top of that. But my experience with private lessons started here around this time, and they've sort of stayed true to this as well. So around this time, we would train in the morning sometimes, and I remember there would be a couple guys that would do these private lessons with my coach right after our morning class. So after we were done, we'd be kind of hanging out, relaxing, just talking, because I'm 18 years old and we got nothing else to do. And then these guys would come in, these old, middle-aged guys would come in and do the private lessons with my coach. They'd do some technique, a little bit of rolling, that kind of thing, and then they'd be done. Well, around the same time as they're starting their private lessons, we had a few other white belts start with us in the gym, right? So we had a couple new white belts coming in. And I remember being able to roll with them, because occasionally the private lesson people would come to a class with us and roll. And then I would be able to, compare that with the skill gain of these guys that are doing these group classes. And when you rolled with the two, it was like night and day. The people that were doing mostly group classes were much tougher. They were better at executing the techniques. They were in better shape. Like any measure that you would compare about being good at jiu-jitsu, meaning like, can I apply my jiu-jitsu against you? By all measures, they were better than the people that did the private lessons. And so from my experience, if I had to choose one, I would be with group classes. Predominantly more so than private lessons. Now, private lessons have their place. And again, I know that this was my experience as a white belt, but that is pretty much rang true even to now, because even as a coach, there are different types of people that take on private lessons. There's some people that do a lot of group classes, and what they'll do is they'll occasionally want a private lesson. Like I have a student, Tony, that does this. He'll come in and he'll say, hey, Chewy, I'm getting to half guard, and this specific thing's happening, and every time that I do this, this happens. He gives me a very specific problem that he's having that then we can drill and we can adjust and make corrections for later on. And then the next month he'll come in and say, okay, Chewy, this thing's happening now that we fix this problem, here's our next problem that I'm running into. What can we do to fix this? And so it's very specific, and we're just fine-tuning. And I think that's the best thing for private lessons, is fine-tuning those specific things or a position or whatever it might be. And then I've also had students that wanted to do pretty much only private lessons, and they would come in and do their private lessons. And again, I noticed the same thing, where if for some reason they went to a group class, they would be exhausted, they would be struggling because they're not used to rolling with multiple different bodies and having to figure out how to adjust to a style on the fly. And there's a lot of other reasons that I think group classes help in this manner. I won't get into them for this video, but they would struggle. And so that's my experience with them. I think they're good for fine-tuning stuff, but I don't think they're an adequate replacement for group classes. There is an exception though. If you are training in jiu-jitsu and you have some extenuating circumstances, maybe you can't, you have some injuries you have to be mindful of. Maybe you work in a job like, I know a lot of actors do private lessons because they got to keep this thing together. They can't be all mangled in their face and stuff. Maybe you're worried about something. Maybe you even have trauma. I see a lot of people that come into jiu-jitsu who will have like physical trauma done to them because of like sexual abuse or something like that. And so they can't deal with this being pressed on and being held down. And so that could be maybe an easier way to ease into jiu-jitsu besides doing a regular rolling class or whatever. But that's my experience with it. Unless there's a reason to do it specifically, I think group classes are a little bit better for most people. Just my experience personally. So you guys can chime in with what your thoughts are. If you like private lessons better, or if you like group classes better, what do you think? Just be interested to see what you guys think. But that's my answer to you, Marc, and hopefully that's helpful to you. And guys, I'll talk to you next time.